So this is going to be the third episode of the podcast, and I am joined today by Michael, who I brought on to discuss his experiences going from being a Yu-Gi-Oh player to being a Magic player. So why don't you introduce yourself, Michael?
My name's Michael. I've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh since it came out. Still play, active player. Not really keeping up, but I still play. I can still compete. And I started playing Magic when the Secret Layer for The Walking Dead came out. That was like an amazing starting point. So once I got that, we just played Commander and been playing Magic since.
Were you aware of Magic before then, or did you have any interest in it, or is The Walking Dead your pathway to getting there?
Yeah, so I did play back in 2013. We had moved to San Jose, and they had a local gaming store, and they didn't have Yu-Gi-Oh events. They only had Magic. So at the time, we were looking for kind of a hobby for me and my wife to get into, and we got into. I think it was Modern, but we were just playing precons during Modern, right? So yeah, so we would play, and it was a very diverse group ranging from 13-year-old all the way up to like veterans from when the game started. So it wasn't all bad, and we learned a lot. So but no, that was my kind of jumping point coming back into the game.
As a longtime Yu-Gi-Oh player, can you tell me what do you think are the biggest differences between Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic?
Definitely the speed and multiple interactions when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh, at least now, at least for the last, maybe I would say even to the last decade of Yu-Gi-Oh, it's been more of like, hey, I'm gonna do this. Do I have permission to do this? The greatest example I could give is just kind of blue players mirror matching is most of Yu-Gi-Oh. I can give any like analogy to how it is, but it's very, very interactive. Like I play this card, do you have a response? Because it's very interactive, it's very back and forth. A turn can go from 15 to 30 minutes if they play, a combo. Depending on the format, it could either be, hey, set up such a great board, you can't break it, or a format where it's like, I'm going to have so much interaction that I'm not really going to kind of let you play through your turn, and then I'll set up advantage and more resources and out resource you. So I would say that would be the main differences of Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic.
So I have sort of passing familiarity with Yu-Gi-Oh. I played all the card games, but only when I was much younger, like as a kid. So Yu-Gi-Oh has trap cards. So that would be, it's kind of like everyone is playing a blue counterspell deck. Is that right?
Yeah, so that's exactly how it is. Or they'll have what we call, and I don't know what they call them in Magic, but we call them floodgates, which means you are not allowed to play. For example, you cannot search your deck, or you cannot draw, or you cannot search. Different types of abilities that just stop you from doing a specific thing. So yeah, so it's pretty much trying not to let your opponent play, or playing through all your opponent's interaction, and then eventually setting up a board and more resources than your opponent. So. But yeah, with the trap cards, the spells, the monster effects, all that is just to come up with the best kind of board and the best and the most resources in the game.
Okay, and as far as the two games go, if I'm not mistaken, Magic has a lot more formats, right?
Yes, a ton of formats. I mean, if you just go to the app and you go new game for life totals, and you can see all the formats, like which format would you like to play? Standard, historic, brawl, pauper, all that stuff. Well, Yu-Gi-Oh, up until recently, and I would say up until the last 3 years, we've only had one format. But since 2019, kind of almost 2018, they've added a few more formats. Specifically, at first you have your advanced, which is the major main format. They've added speed duels, which kind of is reminiscent of like the early days of Yu-Gi-Oh. They shrunk the limit of how many monsters you can have on the field, how many spells and traps you can have on the field, and they added specific characters from the anime to kind of make it a little bit more feel like more like the TV show more than actual card game, or the advanced format. In other regions like Japan, they've added rush duels, which is like pretty much trying to condense the duels to like maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and just having your opponent's life points go down. Time Wizard format, which you can choose which year you want to play in. So for example, what we consider the greatest of all time also go because of cards called specifically Scapegoat. A lot of people consider very diverse format would be Edison format. So named after the Yu-Gi-Oh Championship Series at Edison in New Jersey. So you have with the Time Wizard format makes it really fun because you can experience, like, let's say what year did you play Yu-Gi-Oh? If you remember?
Oh, I was a kid, so it would have been back when the show was just airing, probably.
Yeah, so you can just let's say, hey, you guys want to play Time Wizard format? And they go, yeah, sure. Do you guys want to do 2008?
Are all the formats that you're talking about, are they all actually played? Because I know, like, yes, Magic has a ton of formats, but not all of them are really played. I would say, obviously, EDH is very big, and then there's like Modern, Standard, Pauper to some extent, Legacy to some extent. Vintage has a very niche audience. Then there's Magic formats like Prismatic or Oathbreaker, where yes, they're technically formats, but hardly anyone plays them. Is it similar to with Yu-Gi-Oh?
In a way. So before these, like for example, Edison format or Goat format, those were exclusively fan run, and the fans and like people of those eras would just kind of meet up and have their own groups and have their own, Discord, their own website for them. But now Konami themselves, the people behind the game, are supporting that. So if a store wants to throw an Edison tournament, meaning from 2011, they can go ahead and do that and support it with official pricing. But yes, people do play those older formats, but only because they started off as like fan formats. Edison and Goat were the main ones.
As far as Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic go, do you prefer one over the other?
I mean, I've always been a Yu-Gi-Oh fan, but I definitely like Magic a lot, only because it's a lot slower than Yu-Gi-Oh. You get to actually enjoy a game, even if I do play against the blue player. It's I still have moments where I can interact within my own turn, and it's a little bit better for playing. It's a lot slower than Yu-Gi-Oh.
So, to give context to the Magic players in the audience, would you say that Yu-Gi-Oh matches are the equivalent of either Drago counterspell decks or Storm decks in Magic?
Yeah, just about. I wouldn't say specifically maybe Storm, but it was more like there at one time in the game there was a deck that had an engine that you could just splash it into everything, and this one was called Sky Striker. And pretty much you splashed it into any deck. You splashed it into the top meta decks. You got to draw and you got to search and you got to draw and you got to search so consistently that it stagnates kind of the meta. And I'm sure it happens in Magic the Gathering, but just the amount of resources that card just brought to you was like enough to where your opponent won't even be able to come back from such advantage, and you have to play that specific, I would say, engine in order to even compete. And that, one, it makes it so that you're kind of overwhelmed really fast, and two, it makes it so that everyone's playing the exact same cards, and there's a more of like a lack of diversity. Maybe I would say recently they haven't had what we call as a tier zero. We've had multiple formats where it was considered a tier zero, meaning like the deck, there's one absolute best deck, and that deck will always win, and it will also be the most expensive, and it'll just not make playing the game very fun.
Okay. Again, I'm approaching everything as a Magic player. Like, what I know of Yu-Gi-Oh is only tangential or from a long time ago. So as far as bannings go, what I've heard is that Konami will ban cards not because they are necessarily detrimental to the health of the format, but that for example, they'll have a new set that they want to sell, and they'll ban out the powerful cards from the previous set to make the newer cards sell more. Is that correct?
Yeah, a perfect example of that would be it happened recently in the last ban list, which we got, I believe, last month. We got a new ban list, and there was a card that was limited to 1 out of 3, which is called Skill Drain, which again we consider a floodgate, which would be an equivalent in Magic would just be to shut off all monster abilities. Now, Yu-Gi-Oh is mostly, and overall most of the decks are monster effects. So everyone was questioning, why is this card that was originally set to just be at 1, now you can play at the maximum. Then they made an announcement shortly after of the new sets that are coming out, and they reprinted that card, meaning they printed it to, well, I'm assuming to sell more. Now, this card also is being reprinted, but this card was also, before the reprint, was $50 each. So now, for the best decks, if you want to have a good chance, you would need at least 3 of those cards. So you're looking at about $150 just to get 3 of those specific cards. Yeah, they are kind of known a little bit for doing a ban list specifically to sell a set.
How much would you say the average price is for a competitive Yu-Gi-Oh deck? Like, if you want to go to a tournament at any level, either just, a local weekly tournament or a higher level tournament, how much would you have to pay to build a, tier 1, tier 0 deck?
At least on average from $300 to $500, and most of the time it's just based off of the extra deck. The extra deck is a part of the game where you have a select 15 cards that you can, if you meet quote unquote, summoning requirements, you can bring them out. Meeting the summoning requirements can be sometimes generic, sometimes it'll be exclusive to like an archetype, but overall the best cards will be generic ones where like every deck can play this specific extra deck card. I would say maybe if at all the equivalent, and I don't want to be disrespectful to Magic, would be maybe like the wish cards, but it doesn't count as your sideboard because you still have your extra deck, but you also have your sideboard in Yu-Gi-Oh. So most of the costs come specifically from the extra deck.
Okay, and so Yukio, as far as I'm aware, it's a strictly competitive one-on-one game, right? Like Magic has all these different formats, EDH being the most popular, which is a 3 or more player format, and then it also has like booster draft and sealed. Is Yu-Gi-Oh strictly constructed competitive one-on-one matches?
Yes, it's always been one-on-one. The only times they do where it's more than one would be teams. And of course, Magic does teams as well, where it's 3 players against 3 players, and best 2 out of 3 players win.
But each member of the team is facing only one other person on the
And
other
each
team.
member of the team is always facing one. Yes, so that has always been and has been Yu-Gi-Oh. Yeah, one versus one.
Is there any sort of limited environment? Is booster draft or sealed deck building a thing in Yu-Gi-Oh?
They tried it once where they sold a set that was meant to kind of draft. It was a set where you paid, I think, $25 to $30, and it came with like a mat. It came with like 8 packs, and then you dueled other duelists in a one-on-one where with all the cards that you opened. So compared to sealed format, but they tried it once. I think they tried it a second time, but yeah, that's the closest they got to like a sealed format.
I'm guessing since they only tried it once or twice, it was not very popular.
Yeah, I don't think it sold very well. It was interesting. I mean, you get a mat and you get the cards, so that's kind of and it wasn't a bad mat either. It was one of those mats that you get from UltiPro and stuff like that. So it was kind of an interesting thought that they were doing that. I love drafting a lot, even though I'm not good at it. So, but that would have been interesting. Something close we're getting now to drafting also is speed duels. So speed duels again is like a condensed format.
Going back to something you were talking about before with bannings and reprints, I meant to mention this earlier. So you say that they'll ban cards and they'll also reprint cards that they just printed that are extremely expensive. How do Yu-Gi-Oh players feel about that?
I mean, some of the veterans are kind of used to it. They're like, okay, yeah, my card went from $100 card to $20, or my card went from being 50 to 10. And they do the most popular cards. They do it so much that, like, a perfect example. When I was playing back in 2010, there was a card called Pot of Duality. That card was the effect was mediocre for now, but it was very good back then. And you needed 3 of those, and each card was $90. Well, eventually, a year later, they reprinted it. And then the next year, they reprinted it. And then the next year, they reprinted it. And then they reprinted it in a structure deck. And then they keep reprinting it. Even to this day, I think within the last year or year and a half, they printed it again. But they keep doing that to some of the best cards. So that $90 card, maybe the original printing might be worth a little bit, but compared to like where you can just buy a common, meaning the cheapest one for like a few cents, or someone would just throw it in as a trade, they reprint cards to the ground. So yeah, it brings down. If it's a good card, it's probably gonna get printed. Just wait 2 3 years, and you'll get to have your hands on it in a different rarity.
See, I don't think Magic players would tolerate that. Like, right? So in Magic, when a card gets printed that's expensive, it usually doesn't get reprinted for at least multiple years at a time. But Yu-Gi-Oh will just one set after another reprint the same expensive cards until their price is just crushed.
Yeah, so a good example of core sets or sets that come out like this are the mega tins. Okay, so those tins are literally all reprints of almost every single card in the last set of the last year. So every card in those golden tins has already been printed once, and they added a twist to it about 2 years ago where they printed exclusive cards that only come in that tin.
So the equivalent of like a Modern Masters or a Modern Horizon set.
Just exactly like that, and that was their selling point, which is really good. I thought it was interesting because the cards that came out in there were immediately played, were immediately top contender cards. So everyone wanted to get their hands on their tin, but the way that Magic players don't tolerate that, Yu-Gi-Oh players are kind of just used to the reprints. They saw before the values go down.
It sounds so bizarre coming from the perspective of a longtime Magic player to hear that. But I can tell you from because I used to work at a game store, and we would buy and sell singles, and at the time it was Magic and Pokemon singles, and then we were trying to do Yu-Gi-Oh singles as well. And I just started advocating that we not even bother to pick up the Yu-Gi-Oh singles because they would come in, we'd buy them, and then a month later they would get reprinted in the next set, and their price would be crushed, and it just wasn't even worth it to pick them up for the most part.
Yeah, you're right, and that's how the way that the market sells. It's like it's they call it the volatile, and I know Magic has its volatility, but I mean, a card can be worth $100 one day, and then the next day it's going to be worth maybe 50 or 40, or even less, depending on how often it's used. So you have to kind of be opportunistic. But when you come to a big game store or a big card shop, it's kind of really hard to be opportunistic. I can go to one person and be like, "Hey, give me $100 for this card," and I can go to different multiple people and do that. While a vendor, they have the location. You come to me, and then I'll sell you the card. But prices going up and down almost like on a daily basis. It's really hard for at least game shops to maintain values on the cards. Yeah, I would say as a store, it would be it can get difficult if you don't have the clientele to offload the singles off of.
So I wanted to move on to the lore and flavor of the games. So Magic has kind of a story behind it, but that's sort of been on shaky grounds for a while. But at least there's some idea that each set is set on a specific world. That world has themes and characters and designs, like Kamigawa Neon Dynasty that was just released, which has a traditional Japanese slash cyberpunk theme to it. All the cards kind of match that. But from looking at Yu-Gi-Oh, it feels like the cards are just like all over the place. They seem to mostly be like ancient Egyptian or anime type, like Gundam robot stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, each set will either introduce like a new what we call archetype, a type of cards, and they all kind of function within each other. They'll print out like 6 to 8 cards of the same archetype. I would say most recently, at least that I remember, like the set came with like a sushi theme. So it was these mini sushi boats, and they would make bigger sushi, and they would transform into more sushi. So that was one of the sets. The other one was more of like Kingdom Hearts crossed over with like the Final Fantasy with the dude with the gun, right, with the gun blade. The other set was penguins. It was a bunch of little penguins that when they got together, they made like a big splash, and you have kind of those little archetypes. At least that one was the most recent that I remember that had kind of interesting, archetypes, but they all kind of contain themselves within their own archetype, not like a universal kind of world. But then you also have little stories of specific characters. For example, there's a card called Sengan, and this card is kind of popular in Yu-Gi-Oh because it's been used it's been used through a lot of formats. I think even today, but the card itself is called Sangan, has its own original art, but then you'll see that little card in another card, for example, in Shared Ride. The artwork is like a bunch of different cards in a bus, kind of in the underworld. And then you'll see him again in Mistaken Arrest, where it's a card where all these banned cards are in this specific card, and they're all behind in jail. So, like, they're all worried, and the little artwork is crying. So like you have where like specific archetypes, and then you have famous cards that are either banned or were very popular that they splash them into these specific like artworks of other cards.
Can we back up to what you said first? Did you say sushi boats?
Yeah, it's called the sous ship archetype.
You gotta help me out here. Are there boats that are alive and they make sushi?
Yep. They're big naval boats, like the military naval boats made out of sushi. Yeah.
The boats are made out of sushi.
Yes. But they have the cannons and the engines and all that stuff.
Okay, this is gonna be very interesting to look up later when I'm grabbing artwork.
Look up sous ship. Yeah, SUSHIP, sous ship. I tried playing with them, but they're just not competitive.
Speaking more on the lore front, I wanted to talk about the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh has, of course, an animated series, but in the Yu-Gi-Oh series, unlike Pokemon, which just takes place in a world where Pokemon exist, in the Yu-Gi-Oh series, they actually play Yu-Gi-Oh and have actual Yu-Gi-Oh cards in the show, but the cards in the show don't do the same thing that they do in real life.
Yes, and to all the Yu-Gi-Oh players slash Yu-Gi-Oh watchers too, I would say don't watch the first like season, I guess, because they lie to you. They will lie to you. So I would say if you start off in the Battle season, I think Battle City arc of the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, that's more of a realistic tone of Yu-Gi-Oh, how Yu-Gi-Oh's played. But the first season of Yu-Gi-Oh, during the Duelist Kingdom, where Yu-Gi goes and does this and does that and gets star chips, like it's just almost nonsense to a Yu-Gi-Oh player. But then they corrected that once they started, I personally think it was the sales. They were selling so many cards, but when they tried to play at the playground, they were like, wait, this isn't like the anime at all. So then they had to kind of, the next season of Yu-Gi-Oh had to switch it up. We're like, hey, these are the rules. This is how it's played. It's more constructed. There's more like an actual, like, it feels like the game. But then after that, they made another season where they're dueling on motorcycles. So it's like, okay, so now they went from being almost realistic to like, okay, we're on motorcycles dueling. So, but at least besides those extra things where they're on motorcycles or they're time traveling or whatever the season they're at, most of the core gameplay is kind of compared to the actual card game.
Okay, now speaking about the competitive scene in Yu-Gi-Oh, so Magic for a long time had I would say, pretty thriving competitive scene, and in the last probably around 2 years, it's gone into complete disarray. It's not because of COVID; it's because of mismanagement, in my opinion. What is the Yu-Gi-Oh competitive scene like?
It's very funny, and I'm probably gonna get a lot of heat if as a Yu-Gi-Oh player, but I want to say it's for clout. I want to say everything is for like to say, hey, I achieved this, I achieved that, because the pricing there is no cash pricing. The pricing is a trophy, packs, and a super rare card that could have cash equivalent because you're the only person in the world that probably has this card, or you out of 8 players have this card and can be sold to a collector for a large amount. But besides that, I mean, it's mostly just kind of, hey, I have this on my belt, I have this trophy, I have this to show for it. But the pricing, it's well, let's just say a $5,000 card, right? And compared to what the amount of work you have to put in, the amount of practice, I would say is not even like a great. I mean, for a hobby, right? You want to see a little bit more of competitive, like an esports kind of payout. Like, for League of Legends, it's what, multi-millions. For like those esports is a lot of money. But when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh, it's rarely, if any, cash pricing, and then it's always like a rare card that someone will sell to a collector, or it's a giant card that you can sell to a collector. That's it. But hopefully, it's not too controversial saying that. For me, saying that it's just a lot of people do it for the clout.
So at least in the Magic scene, because I used to be, well, I still compete, but I used to be much more into it. The way I saw it was you would go through lower level events, which would mean you'd occasionally be able to compete at a small local game store with maybe 60 to 100 players. Or you could go to Grand Prix, which were much larger events that were held at convention centers and would attract somewhere around maybe 1,000 to 3,000 players. And you would go and compete in events there. If you won those events, you would then go on to larger regional events, and then eventually you could get to the Pro Tour, which would be a much larger event. I don't remember how many players would actually make it to the Pro Tour. I think it was around maybe 500 or so, but I'm just saying that from memory. I could be off. And you would compete for very, very large prizes. But unless you made it to the Pro Tour, the actual cash prizes you were winning at these events was usually not worth it. It would mostly be either recouping your entry fee, or if it was like one of these convention centers, depending on whether you could carpool there or if you had to fly there, you were usually just trying to recoup your travel expenses, recoup your hotel bill, that kind of thing. And even then, it was very difficult to do. Now, the system just feels like it's in complete disarray. I have no idea what events to compete in order to advance, and I've just kind of given it up as a result. And I think a lot of other Magic players have the same thought. So take me through, what are the steps in the Yu-Gi-Oh competitive scene? How do you advance from one event to another? What is the equivalent of the Pro Tour or World Championship?
Yeah, so it's a lot easier. So than that, so there's the basic locals, which is just for pricing for that game store, and then you have your special events, which is like a Win-A-Mat Day or Yu-Gi-Oh Day, where you compete for a specific like rare card or specific map, but then this is still in your local tournament store. Then you have the bigger event, which is a Yu-Gi-Oh regional. Yu-Gi-Oh! Regional can range from like 200 to 1,500 players, and then that one leads you to the bigger event is a YCS Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series, which is kind of a standalone event, but it's like major play. This one can show from like 500 to again 1,500 players, and then after that it's nationals, and then the World Championship qualifier, and then that's it. So if you, depending on the size, if you top 64 players, you get an invite to nationals, which is, it could be in Tennessee, or it can be in New Jersey, or it can be in Anaheim. So once you get your invite, then you have an opportunity to play in the national level, like top 8 cut, I believe, or top cut of the nationals, then gets to go to the World Championship qualifier. I don't remember if it's like top 8 or top 16, but then they get to go into the World Championship. And then after that, it's like kind of one per state. So, like, USA and then Germany and Japan. So you pretty much have to win your regional, top or get enough points in your national to go to the World Championship Series, and then to go to the top 8 of all duelists around the world.
But none of these events award cash prizes?
No cash. Packs only. For example, if out of 1,000 players, you get, you're one of the top 16 best duelists out of 1,000 something players, your consolation prize is probably going to be 1 or 2 packs that can either maybe pull you a good card, maybe not. But most of the time, you're not going to even recoup your entry fee. And if you top 8, you might win a mat that can be worth from like $100 to maybe at the most $500, maybe. And then if you got first place, you maybe got a card that is worth maybe a few $100s along with the mat that's already worth $100. So maybe you might be able to recuperate, which, if you're paying hotel, you're paying gas, you're paying for your food, you're paying for the cards themselves, you're paying for all this. It's almost, I don't know how people do it. Well, in a way, I do know how. I mean, they get sponsorships, but it's really hard to recuperate your losses.
Sponsorships, do they get sponsored by Konami or other companies?
No, it'll be sponsored by maybe like a local game store, or we'll send out a team of 3 people, and they go, we'll pay for everything if you bring us back the pricing, and we can sell the pricing at full retail value.
Got it. So, okay, my question is then, so it sounds like it's very much not worth it in terms of like, even if you're not getting any cash, you are getting product that you can sell for cash, but I imagine, again, from what you're telling me, not a lot, and you also have to go through the rigmarole of actually selling it. So how do Yu-Gi-Oh cards maintain high prices then, if the competitive scene is generally not awarding prizes of any real value?
So pretty much jumping on like almost like stock trading, waking up at 5 a.m., doing your research on what stock is going to be good, waking up early in the morning, looking at what you would consider quote unquote Yu-Gi-Oh news. Are there new sets that are going to come out? Looking at their website. This set is going to come out. I wonder if they're going to reprint a specific card, or hey, the new tins just arrived, those golden tins. That means every single card in the previous set is going to be reprinted. Okay, well maybe I should sell my $100 card because it's probably going to get reprinted, or there's a trend of this is going to sell. Or buying cards that, hey, maybe the new Konami announces a new deck type that specifically, let's say, quote unquote, for a Magic term, exiles a lot of cards. So then at that point, I'm like, hey, let me look through the Yu-Gi-Oh database. What card could be useful in an exile deck? So then you look up cards and be like, hey, let me pick this up. It's only $1. Then when the new set comes out, that $1 card goes to 5, and you bought like 100 of those. Pretty much that's how I've seen it. I'm trying to make their money back, or trying to make money even in Yu-Gi-Oh, investing a little bit in it, and then the card actually does become good.
But I guess my question is, how is there a demand in the first place for these cards? Because if I'm, let's say I'm a Yu-Gi-Oh player and, I'm just playing at the local game store once a week and I'm winning, $10 in store credit, why am I going to go out and spend hundreds of dollars to pick up all the most competitive cards?
And this is what brought me to my original point, that a lot of people do it for the fame. Yu-Gi-Oh does have kind of like a fallback for that specific reason, and that's their collector rares and their starlight rares. Now, there's a small chance that when you open a pack, there could be a card in there that can be worth like between $500 to maybe like 1,000 or $1,500, almost kind of like the newest set. You know how there's like a card there worth like 1,500, which is insane, but that's why they take the chance on it, because it could be when they give you your pricing, and most stores don't do store credit anymore, they just give you packs. That kind of also brings down the value of winning a local tournament, because before you could get store credit, and I remember a time when I was getting store credit, I was playing at this place called Upper Deck Entertainment Store. and they had the Yu-Gi-Oh events, but they also had collectibles. They had events where they would do baseball card signings, and they would have signings for like, Kobe Bryant. They had also bids, and then so this game store was also, they were giving you store credit, but you could get it for anything, not just specifically Yu-Gi-Oh. So I remember somebody buying a Kobe autograph with just their store credit from winning Yu-Gi-Oh. So I was like, okay, that makes more sense. Like, you're buying a Kobe autograph. I'm sure that can only go up, right? That can only, like Shaquille O'Neal autograph, that can only go up. But now most stores are just tying their pricing with what they're selling. So, for example, if you win Yu-Gi-Oh, you're gonna get Yu-Gi-Oh packs. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I have rarely seen store credit now with Yu-Gi-Oh.
So would you say currently then that the Yu-Gi-Oh player base is declining, expanding, or just staying the same?
I think it's staying the same. I still see new faces. I mean, I still see new people, younger people, but I'm not seeing a lot less of the older kind of generation. They're sticking to their old formats, like I was telling you earlier about Edison or Go format there. They said, hey, Yu-Gi-Oh's changed too much. I want to go back to, 2011, and I want to go back to 2008. Luckily, Yu-Gi-Oh has jumped on that and said, hey, if a store has enough older players, why don't you just throw a 2009 tournament? Set it up ahead of time, and we'll give you some packs for participating. So I do see a lot of new faces. I've been seeing a lot of new faces, even just competing recently. I do see the player base, at least here in LA, growing, and I do see some of the older players kind of maybe not playing, or maybe going to another different game. Yeah, I think it's staying the same. It's just replacing the old players with the new players.
You mentioned earlier that you originally got into these games as a hobby for you and your wife to share, but I've played with you in person, but I don't think I've ever shared a game with your wife. Does she go out and play at local game stores, or is it just a thing for both of you to do one-on-one in your own home?
We were originally doing it one on one in our own home. We were playing in Thor events, but the social aspect is really what got her. Where she was like, "Oh, I'm too nervous," or they were teaching me all this stuff, and they were teaching me to play on the stack or on the play, or they were doing these terms, and like, and I felt bad too because at the time we made standard decks, and this was during when allies. Gideon of Ally got introduced,
So
and
Battle for Zendikar?
yeah, and so we joined there, and so I made her and Soul Artifacts, and I pulled the Gideon, so I made allies, and we were playing, and they were like, oh yeah, we have events every day, so we're like, okay, so we went to standard, we played, we did pretty decent. At the time, it was one pack per win, so we had to win once to get one pack, and that was pretty exciting for us. But then the next night, they're like, oh yeah, come tomorrow, we'll play Magic again. I didn't know there was multiple formats. Then we went into modern, and this guy pulled out an infinite rat deck and completely slaughtered my wife to the point where she's like, "This is really hard." And I was like, "I know. Why did he beat us so bad? Like we were doing good yesterday, right? We both got a pack." And then they explained to us, "Oh, this is modern. These are multi-$100,000 decks with that we've been playing for a long time, and the power level compared to standard is a lot different." I was like, "Oh, okay. So there's other formats." And then once we found out about diverse formats, we were so confused. We were like, "Okay, let's just stick to us playing, or we'll keep continue to play standard." And it got even more difficult when we would go to a Target and we would see all these sets, like so many sets, and I was like, "Well, is this card legal? Is this card legal? Is this card legal? Like, what can I play? What can I not play?" This is where we learned about rotation. This is where we learned about formats. And it got so overwhelming that we were like, you know what? I think one of our cards rotated out, and someone called me out on it. I didn't know, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you can't play this card anymore." So like, oh okay, now I learned about rotation. So when in Yu-Gi-Oh, it was just like, hey, every card's legal unless it's on the ban list. So I had a list I can go off of and be like, okay, this card's not here, I'm good to go. This card's not here, I'm good to go. It's only one format, one ban list. That's it. When Magic had, so it was like almost overwhelming that it kind of turned us off. Plus, at the time, I started getting more competitive in Yu-Gi-Oh. That I started, just playing more Yu-Gi-Oh. And then I also became a Pokemon professor, so I was running 2 local game store events for Pokemon, and that kind of also took my time. So I kind of dropped Magic altogether until I came back for the Walking Dead.
From the story you're telling me, what I'd recommend for your wife then is to join EDH, because you can just build whatever you want. You never have to worry about rotation, and to a degree, you don't have to worry about your deck being too competitive.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and then to get over her crippling anxiety over social people. So, yeah, definitely a good tip to have her play.
The last question I had on my mind, this is kind of an odd one, is I've noticed this might be my own personal experience. Maybe it's isolated to specifically being in Southern California, but I've noticed that the overwhelming amount of Yu Gi Oh players that I've ever met are either Hispanic or Black. And I wonder why that is. Is there something about the game that uniquely appeals to those demographics?
Good question. I played in San Jose and I played here in Southern California. So I played Northern California, Southern California. I do tend to agree with like those statistics that you've seen regarding race and ethnicity. But some of the top players they're mostly Caucasian. I think what we see sometimes regarding race and ethnicity is through our own local area. So our own local area here in Los Angeles is like it's heavy Latino, heavy African American, and so we see that a lot. But I recently just came back from North Carolina, and I was the only Latino Magic player there because I went for the drafting events for Pokemon and for Magic. Yeah, I was the only Hispanic there. Everybody else was Caucasian, and I went to three different local shops in three different cities, doing three different drafts, and then doing one draft in the same store for Pokemon, and it was like I was the only Latino. And this was in North Carolina, which of course is in the East Coast, more towards like where like it's the Bible Belt, where like there's a lot of Caucasians. But yeah, and even at the grocery store, I made sure to make a count. In my whole trip, and I was there a week and a half in North Carolina, I saw three Latinos, and then other than that, it was mostly Caucasian or Black. And I saw one Asian demographic, and that was it. But I did a lot of traveling because we were looking for a home, so we did a lot of we were on the road a lot. We were in stores, out stores, restaurants, and yeah. So I think when it comes to demographics, it's more of like our local area that affects like, oh, I think maybe the demographic is more diverse. Well, yeah, because we're in California. But if you went to go draft or play, I while they were drafting, they were also doing modern, and it was all Caucasians too over there in North Carolina. So I think we see it through the lens of our local area.
So I've thought about that, but like I also play Magic, and I've seen the Pokemon players, Digimon players too, and I feel it seems to be something that's unique to Yu-Gi-Oh because like all the Magic players I meet, the ethnicities are all over the place. There's no pattern.
Yeah. I mean, without getting too much into politics too, I think Yu-Gi-Oh might be cheaper too. Maybe the demographics and the income source could be maybe a little bit less. I personally think it's also cheaper to play than Magic. I mean, trying to make a modern deck compared to making a meta Yu-Gi-Oh deck now the top Yu-Gi-Oh deck now is the price difference is completely different. And of course, with less pricing. Right now, if you want to make the best Yu-Gi-Oh deck, I think you're going to be spending from $500 to $800. With the newest set right now would be the average. While in Magic, if you want a best deck or if you want to even compete, I mean, you need four of the what is it, dual lands, or four of
So
the.
I can tell you really quickly. So here's the top 5 decks in Modern right now. They are so Death Shadow is almost $1,200. Hammer Time is 900. Murktide is 1,200. Four color Blink / Omnath decks are 1,800, and Amulet Titan is 850.
It's not bad. 850. Yeah. So our prices for Yu-Gi-Oh, like the prices that for the cards are can't even compete with that. Because if I add up, one of the best decks is a good deck, but that's because the newest set made it the best deck. So, you have hot cards that are like, you need to play three of $60 each, but there's only like a few of those in there. So yeah, I would say also maybe, the demographic is because it's cheaper. I mean, which also maybe go into Pokemon might be a little bit cheaper as well, but the weird thing about Pokemon is that like when I was competing in it, is you were playing a lot of kids, and I personally, don't like playing kids that much because one, it feels bad when you utterly blow them out of the water with the best deck, but two, it's just like I want to play with someone kind of my own skill level where like a kid has been playing for a year when I want to be playing someone that's has had good practice and it's just not there for a good time. I want to have more competitive, but that's a good question to ask about demographics and which specific card games they belong to. But yeah, I do see a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh players that are Hispanic and that are African American that play the game compared to Magic the Gathering.
All right, well, that's all the questions I had. Was there anything you wanted to bring up?
No. Thanks for. It's my first time being in a podcast, and that's pretty cool that you're doing that. And thank you for taking into consideration some Yu-Gi-Oh players that are playing Magic. Right now, I'm into Standard, so I've been playing Standard because of the newest set, because it reminds me of Yu-Gi-Oh.
Now, when you say standard, are you playing in paper or online?
I'm gonna start. I just made a deck. I'm playing the Green Stomp, and I'm playing the Demir Ninjas, which is kind of a tier two, but the artwork on it is just superb. So I had to play, with the lands, having that Asian kind of Japanese feel, and the ninjas, or sorry, ninja. I just learned that you're not supposed to say ninjas. That in the Japanese world, they don't have plural for things, so it's ninja. It's like even a group of multiple ninja is just called ninja. So the ninja deck is really cool. The artwork in it is really good. Cyberpunk, like you said, and that's what kind of wanted me to play Standard. Plus, demographics over there in North Carolina, which hopefully maybe go in there some one day, is that they play a lot of Standard. So I'm gonna have to get used to for the local area that I was looking over there is mostly Standard. So I want to get into that and kind of start early now and then kind of get better at it. So that's what I'm playing now. And of course, I'm playing Commander. And then those are kind of my two. For Yu Gi Oh!, I'm playing Speed Duels, I'm playing Edison, and I'm playing Advanced. My accolades, I don't really have that many accolades. I would say an accolade for Yu Gi Oh! Would be, getting top 64 or getting your invitation to a national tournament, which I've done 3 times. And then my greatest achievement was getting ninth place at a 1,000+ person regional here in Los Angeles. So if my words have any merit to it, that's the best I did in Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's why you should or shouldn't listen to me. But yeah, I've been playing for a while. That was kind of the top of my Yu-Gi-Oh! Career, and that's where pretty much I'm gonna end it because I wanted to do the top 8 or first place, but it didn't happen. But 9 out of 1,000+ players seemed good enough for me to just be like, you know what? I don't want to do competitively. I don't want to duel every single day just to get better. I'll leave it at that. So that's
Yeah,
that's me right there.
I think the best I've ever done is Grand Prix Vegas 2017. I got 23rd out of 3,000 players.
Wow. Yeah, that is a lot of players. I don't think I've ever been to an event with more than like 1,500 players. I think Anaheim back in the day of Yu-Gi-Oh was I think maybe close to 2,000 players, but never 3,000. And that sounds like amazing prize. It sounds like you probably recoup your your your
Yeah, well, I think I won. I can't remember if it was 500 or 750. It was enough to cover all my expenses from going there, but it wasn't like some huge windfall or anything.
I got 2 packs for ninth place for
Congratulations.
a 9-hour tournament.
What'd you get from the packs?
Nothing, literally nothing. It was like a super rarity that had maybe like a 2 cent card, and another super rare that had like maybe a 3 cent card. But I did it for the to say that I did it, and for the to be shouted out on YouTube and to do deck profiles. So it was still a good time. I got the recognition that I wanted.
All right. Well, thanks very much for joining me today, Michael.
Yeah, of course. I'll probably see you around. I'll probably start heading out to the standard tournaments and standard events over there in the local game shops. So, yeah, we'll see you soon.
All right.